This is Locked On Sports Atlanta, and it's time for the Atlanta Football Party, only on Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Atlanta Football Party, your home for the best Atlanta Falcons football talk. It's local insight you can't get anywhere but right here at Locked On. I'm your host, Tenitra Batiste. Alongside me, our Falcons analyst, Jarvis Davis, Locked On Falcons host, Aaron Freeman, and senior Falcons reporter, Tori McElhaney. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your money and your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. And of course, our Atlanta Football Party is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So moving on from a could be great, we'll discuss thumbs up, thumbs down, or TBD on 2024. We'll debate it up, down, or stick around in 15. We'll talk about that too. We'll download on that. And if he is headed to Canton on his first try. But first, let's talk about the 8-2 connection that might pay dividends for the Falcons offense. Michael Penix Jr. got some mentoring from Kirk Cousins, of course, as his understudy, and even after taking over last season. But MPX looks to have an MVP in his corner this season. And this article actually comes from Tori's colleague over at AtlantaFalcons.com. Coach Raheem Morris said, quote, "You talk about what is your offseason plan and how do you go about that process? Try to hook him up with people to talk to about what they've done in their past, whether that be Matt Ryan, whether that be his coaches, whatever the case may be before he left." So when you think about it, with Matty Ice having experience, my goodness, working with 4 OCs, whole heck of a lot. And then when you look at the fact that he had to work with, as a result, multiple schemes, a load of schemes, and even an improvement of his skills that ultimately led him to being coined MVP of the league. Tori, what do you think about the potential impact that having Matt Ryan walking along with Michael Penix Jr. can be?
I mean, I think it can be astronomical to the mentorship and development of Michael Penix early on in his career. And I think that it's so funny because I feel like the way that people feel about Matt Ryan today is not how the loudest faction of the fan base felt 2 or 3 years ago. And if not longer than that. And that's really sad. Like, I wish that more people knew what they had when Matt Ryan was quarterbacking this team. And I have firmly stood in that camp for a very, very long time. And I think that the fact that Matt Ryan still has the connection that he does to the organization, to the point of Raheem Morris calling him up and being like, "Hey, can you come in and work with this guy? Hey, can you get on the phone with this guy?" Like, tell him everything that you want to tell him about who he is. And the fact that Matt Ryan, the Ryans still live in Atlanta. Atlanta's still home for them. So if he needs to, he can drive down the road to the facility out in Flowery Branch and meet up and have a chat with Michael Penix. I think that is so important to Michael Penix, who we know Michael Penix is very much an even keel guy. He's a very calm, cool, collected. He does it. He's literally he was at the TGL and, he has Michael Vick sitting beside him. And he's talking to Kyle Pitts, Jesse Bates, Arthur Blank, and he's just like super dead set on eating his wings. And I'm like, that's just who he is. Like he's like, everyone's like, my guy. Like,
my guy.
Yeah. So I think like that's who he is. So I don't necessarily see like this mentorship of like Matt Ryan being like Matt Ryan telling him kind of like how to handle everything. Because I think Michael Penix already has such a good head on his shoulders anyway, in terms of being able to do that. I think it's more about, honestly, like just having someone who has been there before and having someone who has taken the same steps and walked the same path or a similar path as what Michael Penix is about to embark on in the next year. But the Falcons hope for as many years as what they had Matt Ryan. So I think that's what you get out of that mentorship.
Yeah, there are a lot of symmetries there, Tori, because you talk about a guy in Matt Ryan who, after things went where they went with Michael Vick, it was like, all right, you save him now. And that's kind of the situation Michael Penix Jr. was put in as well. And also symmetry of just those even-keeled natures, very laid-back guys, very not too high, not too low. So, yeah, I think that's a plus as well. And I think, too, like you said, Michael Penix Jr. is that guy who doesn't need a whole heck of a lot of mentoring, if you will, but what mentoring or what partnership or what support he can get, I don't think there's anybody better to give it to him than Matt Ryan. And like you, Tori, and Jarvis can tell you, even from when we would do our version of an Atlanta football party, my mantra was always, you people will miss him when he's gone. You keep underappreciating, you keep disrespecting two. I promise you, the day two walks out of Flowery Branch, it'll fall off a cliff and you guys will be grateful. Didn't mean it to fall off a cliff this way, but I just feel like you're absolutely right on that. Matt Ryan was a treasure that I don't think this Falcons fan base appreciated enough until they didn't have a generational type quarterback. And now to have another one, Jarvis, and to have that guy, Matt Ryan, be able to mentor with, partner with, walk with, who could be that next generational quarterback for the Falcons could be huge.
Yeah, it absolutely, because when you think about the amount of success that Matt had, when he was here, being the first Falcon to win a league MVP award, right? Those are some of the things that when you have that type of person being willing to work with you, I think Michael Penix can fully understand like the gravity that comes with that, right? So because when I first heard about it, the first question that came to mind was like, okay, how can Matt really help, like tangibly? I know the idea of it makes a lot of sense, but when you're talking about tangible results, because I'm real big on this offseason, that and Terry is fighting for a job, potentially, whatever. But I think that when you look at it from not only on the surface, but you kind of dig a little deep, right? Because this is Michael Penix's first year coming in as the starter, right? Because that offseason preparation is different from when you were a rookie, when you knew for a fact that you weren't going to play unless injury or unless it actually went off the rails, and that's exactly what happened. He ended up playing the last 3 games of the season. So I think that being able to have that phone number to say, hey, man, I'm thinking about doing this because I want to get with Kyle, I want to get with Drake, I want to get with Bijan, but their schedule's a little off. So how did you deal with that when you were trying to get Roddy and Harry and Julio all together? So, those are the type of things questions he can ask that not most can answer, right? Not even your quarterback coach probably couldn't answer that, right? Because they haven't reached that level of quarterbacking that you're on right now. So I feel like could work out tremendously for MPX's development, and to have Matt around the building a little bit more, that's great to me. I love to see it.
Yeah, and Aaron, I think about when I first started off in the broadcast industry, I can remember people telling me that everything that you do, once you get around 100 reps, all of a sudden it feels like it's so natural. But the 1 through 99 reps are like, pulling teeth. And sometimes you've got to call people and say, all right, what is it that, I didn't do? What is it that I did do well, so on and so forth. And then all of a sudden you get to that 100th rep and it's like, oh, wow, like the floodgates open. I feel like Matt Ryan, to Jarvis's point as well, has the ability to give that as an example to say, hey, man, when I was trying to get my timing right with Roddy, similar to how you might be trying to get your timing right with Drake, we threw, we played catch, we did all this stuff. And all of a sudden one day it just clicked. Just even if it's something that minor as encouragement as it relates to timing or switching centers. The center you had the first year isn't the center you're having in year 2. Those are the types of things I think are the nuances of playing at the level Matt Ryan played that we think Michael Penix Jr. can play that could pay dividends.
Yeah, I think, this relationship has a lot of value to a young player like Michael Penix Jr. To me, the big question I have is just sort of the repetition. You talk about repetition in terms of, that 1 through 100 or whatever, but it's just like I'm curious to see what type of repetition does Michael Penix have with Matt Ryan with this rapport. Is it going to be like a single phone call where it's just like, that's valuable, but that's not as valuable as 10 phone calls or your 20 phone calls or 100 phone calls? So I think that's going to be the interesting thing with this relationship that Michael Penix has with Matt Ryan is going to be, how frequent is this? How is it going to be like, hey, I did this, and you can do this, and I know other guys in the league that can do this, and I can connect you with other guys in the league, that sort of thing. Is this going to be sort of a one-off, or is this going to be something that is going to be a tried and true relationship that Michael Penix can not only carry through the offseason, but also carry through, the season and whatnot? And so I think that's going to be, to me, the more compelling part for me, just rather than just that initial link up is there going to be follow through and whatnot?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Tori.
No, I was just going to say, like, it's funny that Free brings this up, because that was exactly what I was thinking when I was down at owners meetings and Raheem said this, because it was almost like we'll connect him with Matt Ryan. Like, I think that it's kind of become this thing where it's like, oh, Matt Ryan is going to mentor Michael Penix. And I don't necessarily feel like that was the context of the quote. Like, I felt like that was kind of not a throwaway comment by Raheem. I don't think he would say that if it was just like a throwaway comment. But I would like to say, I do think that it was more of hey, like, Matt Ryan's around. We have a good relationship with Matt Ryan. Like, we'll connect you guys. Like, y'all chat, y'all link up. So I think Free brings up a good point. Like, actually, what does this look like? Is this just a phone call and like, hey man, if you ever need anything, I'm around, like I'm down the road? Or is this something that could potentially develop into kind of what we're talking about in a full-on mentorship?
Jarvis, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, I think this is something that I feel when you're talking about genuine relationships, and I think that's what kind of Free is kind of touching that, and Tori as well.
Organic aspect.
Like organic. Like, you wanted to be organic and say, hey, you guys, here's his number, here's his number. Here, y'all be friends. Like, I didn't like that when my mom used to try to make me be friends with certain people. And I'm sure Michael Penix, as a 22, 24-year-old, quarterback, and Matt Ryan as a man with kids and all that stuff, and I'm sure Sarah is looking at him like, who you about to mentor? Who you about to be leaving the house with to go work with? Are you going out on the field? Like, it's just a lot of stuff that comes with that word, because mentorship is not easy, because at the end of the day, you're trying to pass down all the knowledge that you gained to get to the level of play that you got to. And Matt got to a very high level of play. So it's going to take a lot more than one phone call, like Free mentioned. I feel like it's going to take a lot of commitment from Matt, who's retired from the NFL and who has a broadcasting career going on. Like, okay, what are we talking about? It's a great idea on the surface, for sure. If you dig a little bit deep, it's like, if he's willing to give up that time, it's going to benefit Michael Penix tremendously, I feel. But like, it has to happen organically, because football players see through bull crap all the time. I feel like they are the biggest bull crap detectors that you can possibly find on the earth in this world today. So for me, I feel like as long as it's authentic, I feel like it'll benefit him the most.
Yeah, I would agree too. And who knows? It could be different things. One thing I will say about the Falcons organization is having brought Michael Vick back into the fold, kind of reconciling that or healing that relationship, having brought Matt Ryan back into the fold so quickly after how things kind of worked out with his departure. I do think that it could go either or both ways. So yes, we're hearing about the comments that Raheem Morris may have made kind of on a surface level about the connection point or the connectivity that Michael Penix Jr. might have with a Matt Ryan, but that could also be with a Michael Vick as well. So I think what's positive or encouraging to me is that the organization is in a place or at a point in place where there's good rapport with the last two quote unquote generational quarterbacks. You have one here, and there's an open door and an open opportunity for Michael Penix Jr. to be able to connect with two of the guys who, in their own ways, albeit different, but in their own ways, changed the trajectory of the franchise, and he could potentially do the same. Now, an intriguing option for how the Falcons could part ways with a guy they wanted to change the trajectory of the franchise, but didn't quite work out. We'll discuss when we take it under further review. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back. That's how it always is with taxes, right? And then waiting, Wondering and worrying maybe some more. Now, taxes, that's matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. So again, no waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now, this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service, real-time updates only in iOS mobile app, and see the guarantee details at TurboTax.com. Guarantees. Again, it's tax season. You got about 8 days left before you have to make it happen. So if you're waiting, if you're wondering, if you're worrying about whether or not you're going to get any money back, or God forbid you actually owe, you can stop all of the waiting, stop all of the wondering, and stop all of the worrying with TurboTax. Get an expert now at TurboTax.com. So, Aaron, there's still a thought that the Falcons could move on from Kyle Pitts, and ESPN's Bill Barnwell actually thinks it's a pretty viable option. His trade proposal recently included Pitts, the Falcons' 15th overall pick in the 2025 draft, and a third rounder in 2026 for the 7th pick in this year's draft. So right there up top, kind of vaulting them into that top 10, if you will. So for you, let's start here. How do you feel about this as an option to move on from KP and ensure the Falcons have a real shot at one of the top pass rushers in the draft? And what's the real probability that Terry Fontenot can actually make this happen?
Well, I'll answer the first question first, or the second question first. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't think there's much of a chance that this trade happens when it comes to trading Kyle Pitts to a team like the Jets as part of a trade up. I think Bill Barnwell and the exercise that he does every year where he has a trade for each pick is always a fun exercise, but I don't think people should put too much stock into it and thinking like, oh, this is something that could really happen. This is just more just like, hey, we've done a million mock drafts at this point in time. Let's do one with, a billion different trades that are going to get people talking as we are sitting here talking about these things. So I look at it where I think if we're going to take it at face value, though, it's an interesting trade where, Kyle Pitts is probably not going to land you, some huge value at this point in time, but as part of a package where, you're potentially able to move up in this case, I do feel like that is a little bit more realistic than just sort of trading him for, some high round pick at this stage. So it's an interesting trade proposal. And certainly if the Falcons are able to get into the top 10, there are an interesting group of players that they could be in the market for. I don't know if Abdul Carter is going to make it to 7, but, certainly if you feel like Jalen Walker, who's often mocked to the Carolina Panthers at 8, the Georgia pass rusher, if he's the apple of your eye, like that probably makes you a little bit more of a player for him or whoever you think is the second best edge in this draft class. So it's an interesting trade proposal. I wouldn't put too much stock into it as like a realistic one, but I certainly think, it gets the conversation started when it comes to these things. And at this stage in the offseason, we just need new things to talk about. So I think that's where it's really valuable.
Right. It's almost like, Jarvis, you sit in the lab and you're like, what can we craft today to figure out? Ooh, I know how to get rid of Kyle Pitts. So Aaron might be onto something there where at this point, it's April 7th. We're all like, we're kind of mock draft out. Is that a word? Mock drafted out? Yeah, mock drafted out.
Yes,
so,
it is.
That's a word. We're mock drafted out and we're kind of figuring out, okay, what looks next? Oh, I know. What looks best next? Oh, I know. Let's talk about a player that has been kind of swinging in the air with question marks all around him for a couple seasons now and what could happen with him. But for you, when you look at how Bill Barnwell kind of laid the possibilities out, do you think that this is even a possibility to happen?
I don't think it's a possibility on day one of the draft. I
Mm.
do think it's possible on day 2, maybe day 3 of the draft, because here's the thing. The Falcons need more picks, right? You know,
Mhm.
if you want to take advantage of all the depth that's in this draft when it comes to edge rushers and those big boys in the middle of this in the middle of the defense. So I just look at this from a standpoint of it kind of speaks to the type of player that Kyle Pitts is and the type of production that he's had since he's been in the NFL. This guy was a top 5 pick. And here he is going into the last year of his contract. And people are talking about, okay, what kind of value can you get for him in a trade on
Yeah.
draft night? That's not
Yeah.
good. Because if he had done what he was supposed to do, and at least 75% of those expectations being the top 5, the highest drafted tight end in the NFL coming draft era, yeah, we wouldn't be having this conversation. So I think this more so is kind of like Bill Barnwell looking at this roster and saying, okay, who hasn't lived up to their those expectations? Who would be a great conversation starter, like Free mentioned, that I can put out there, because it actually makes sense that, you know, the Falcons will be willing to do away with him if they can find out a way it can benefit them on draft night, and be able to make a move that can potentially change the trajectory of their season in 2025.
Yeah. And what about you, Tori, when you kind of look at that option? Because again, it's been one of those things that's been floating around for a couple seasons now. What will the Falcons do with KP? But with this most recent recommendation, what's your opinion on what Bill Barnwell laid out in terms of like the realistic option for that?
I think it's way more realistic that the Falcons move down in the first round than move up. And I've said this a couple of times. Like, I don't see there personally. Terry Fano could be thinking something completely different. But if
No, everything differently from everyone else, that's not possible. Sorry.
So if I'm not moving up, if anything, I'm sticking at 15, or I'm moving down and accruing more capital. And I think that should be, I know some people maybe be like, oh, that's really safe and you're playing safe, but I don't think people realize like how many defensive needs this team has. This team needs to draft, I think, 3 starters and or guys who are rotating in on second and third down and being playmakers for this team.
Amen.
Like, there is not a part of me that's like, even if it's parting ways with Kyle Pitts and like that's the way that you could, like, there's no part of me that's like, move up in the draft. Like, I think that you can get what you need to get by sticking at 15 or dropping down, because I do think that there are some solid options of players to, I think Jarvis's point, in the early second round, or even like mid to low second round. And I think that if the Falcons can get another pick in the second round or get a third round pick back, like, that's what they should be prioritizing, not this idea of potentially moving up in the draft to go and get, let's just say, Jalen Walker. I think that what there is going to be available at 15 will be sufficient to the needs of what the Falcons have, while also being realistic that they have a lot more needs and need a lot more picks in order to fill those needs.
Yeah. And you kind of look at it from, I think that's a great perspective. And I think on this show, we kind of have collectively said we are perfectly okay if the Falcons move back, because if there can be anything in the way of draft capital that they can somehow get back, however it works out, like, they're actually in a very good position at 15, because they don't have to force the issue based on what this particular draft class is bringing as it relates to, obviously we say edge rushers, but really several positions of need that they have. So yeah, I think that the Falcons are actually in a good position not to be forced to do anything as it relates to Kyle Pitts. But I'll throw this caveat out to you guys real quick. Does the extension the Cardinals gave to Trey McBride, and when you kind of look at their numbers, not saying that their impact has been the same, but the numbers aren't actually that far off, do you feel like that at all complicates the Falcons' ability to move on from Pitts? Or maybe it can be an advantage if they decide to kind of go that route to show other teams that, hey, Pitts has some value, because look at Trey McBride's numbers, look at Kyle Pitts' numbers, and and kind of look at where Trey McBride is as far as what his extension was?
I think just from a projecting out standpoint, you could potentially use that. Only way I feel like the Falcons can use that is that, okay, we know that we can probably have a conversation. If Kyle has a solid to really good year, we know that that's probably the ceiling on what we'll be willing to pay him just from a contract standpoint. But as far as being able to figure out a way to be able to move him because of that, I don't know if I can necessarily make that connection. But I do think that Trey McBride's contract is not all that, like, it's not that bad, right? I feel like that's a decent, decent number. But, I know that like I said, if Kyle Pitts has that type of year that he should have, in this offense, I feel like we at least know that that's the ceiling for his contract.
Yeah, I think the challenge is if you're trading Kyle Pitts, the team that's acquiring him is basically renting him for a year before paying him, right? And so they have to feel good about, hey, we feel like it's very likely that we're going to pay him at the end of this year. And so when you look at that Trey McBride number, I don't know if what you've seen from Kyle Pitts as of late makes you feel very comfortable paying him, almost $20 million a year. So a team that would have to acquire Kyle Pitts would have to feel like, okay, we can drop him into our offense and we can get that type of production from him. Or, a team could look at it in the similar way that the Falcons look at the Matthew Judon situation, where the Falcons traded for Matthew Judon and didn't necessarily seriously consider giving him an extension despite him wanting that extension. And so you could look at, the $11 million that you're paying Kyle Pitts and you're like, oh, that's a bargain for what we might have to pay for another tight end on the open market. So I do think the Trey McBride contract does complicate things a little bit for a potential Kyle Pitts trade, just because it does sort of set the price for what a team would potentially have to pay Kyle Pitts on a second contract after the season is done. But at the same time, you could look at it from the opposite perspective of, hey, $11 million is a relatively cheap option compared to what the market is dictating. So maybe that does help you potentially facilitate a trade.
Indeed. So before we look ahead to April 24th, April 25th, April 26th, let's take a look back at how it started last April 25th. We'll talk about it when we run it back. So, Jarvis, we are less than 3 weeks away from the big day. We're also getting set for the 2025 draft. But before we do that, let's take a look back at the class of 2024 pick by pick. And here's what I want you guys to kind of think about, T, what I want you guys to kind of think about, Free. What did you think about each player that the Falcons drafted last year when they drafted that player? And then kind of fast forward to what you thought about him at the end of last season. And it could be a to be determined, which it will be for several of them, by the way. And then what your expectations are for the player heading into 2025. And let's start right at the top, Jarvis. Let's start with Michael Penix Jr. Of course, the Falcons took him in round 1 at pick number 8.
I was like, what the hell is this organization doing?
What?
At the time. I did not understand it. I was trying to figure it out because I wasn't a big fan of the Kirk Cousins sign, to be quite honest, right? Because coming off an injury, he has to play through whatever insecurities that he has and being able to make those throws, being able to step into the throws, and not having coming off of a major injury, which was his first one of his career for real. So it was just too many red flags for me when they signed Kirk Cousins, and for them to kind of double down on that and say, hey, let's get another quarterback and bring him in. It just totally threw me off. And as I kind of got my eyes on Michael Penix leading up to the draft and then started thinking about it, like, okay, Kirk is not going to be around here for that long. And then, okay, he can sit behind him the old school way of, bringing in young quarterbacks and letting them sit and learn and all that good stuff, right? And then fast forward to the end of the season, Michael Penix gave me a little hope because that Kirk Cousins situation is still lingering. Nobody has claimed the fart. You know what I'm saying? Like, nobody. It still smells. It's still stinking in the hallway. They dropped that doggone bomb and everything, and it's just nobody don't want to claim it. Nobody want to claim it. It's still stinking. It's still right now. I feel it in my nose. It's right there in my nose, and it won't go away. So, yeah, Michael Penix still being here, playing for those 3 games, and he gives me hope. And I got a little spray too. You know what I'm saying? So as soon as Kirk is gone, I can go and get rid of that stench that's in my nose.
Okay, so we know how Jarvis feels, or can you tell us how you really feel? No, we know how Jarvis felt about Michael Penix Jr. at the beginning and at the end of the season. Give me your expectations for him this coming season.
Oh gosh, wow. 26 points a game. That's where I am. Like average 26 points a game. And you'll be in that top 10, top 15, as far as top 12, scoring offense. And if he does that, oh my gosh, like this team will be in a really, really good spot. And you will hope and pray that Raheem Morris and Jeff Ulbrich get this thing figured out on the defense side of the football. And Terry Fontenot as well, I'm charging him to that as well. And bringing in some guys that can rush the passer like Tori mentioned. I promise you, it was almost like you was singing a gospel song, Tori, earlier when you was like bringing in guys and rotating them in and second and third down because there's a situation where we know they're going to throw the football and everybody just line their hands up in the dirt and they just going to go get that mother blanket right there, put them on the ground. I just love it, I don't know about y'all, but I'm getting excited.
So mother blanket and gospel all in the same diagram. Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Tenitra, I was raised like, come on, y'all. Y'all have to. Like, please
the Church
forgive
of
me.
Jarvis is a little different.
For those who don't know, I'm born and raised from Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? The home of churches and strip clubs.
Well, this
so
is true.
I have a varied upbringing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
that
so
is
I
fair.
don't.
That is fair.
I don't lean.
That is fair.
I don't lean towards the strip club part. You know what I'm saying? I'm more so on the church side now. You know what I'm saying? Because I'm a changed man. I'm no longer a heathen. Free.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
We understand. Save him, Tori. Save him from himself.
Yes,
So
I'm drowning here, Tori. Please save me.
You were in the room, Tori, last year when all of this went down. And obviously, you are sitting there with bated breath, and you're the person who probably writes multiple stories and has multiple, just ready for wherever the Falcons go. But T, when you heard with the number 8 pick in the 2024 NFL draft, the Atlanta Falcons pick University of Washington quarterback Michael Penix Jr., what was your first reaction?
It was immediately like, how am I going to spin this to like make this make sense? Because, and the reason I say that is because we all know I work for the organization, and I am very much like I wear this with pride that I am still critical and fair in my evaluation and everything like that. But also at the exact same time, also not the disclaimer puppy.
Somebody help us, please.
Okay.
It's been an incredible segment. Incredible.
It's our best one ever, man.
I was like, okay, how am I going to get the fan base like on board with this decision?
Yeah.
I knew that the fan base, like seeing the videos of like people reacting to the pick, like immediately upon the pick happening, I was like, all right. Like, and that's why I wrote the column that I did that night about like, hey, this is the front office kind of being like, we're not going to go through the same thing we went through when we traded Matt Ryan to Indianapolis, which was true. That's exactly what they said. Like what I was saying was not anything they weren't saying. And so I think like at the time, it was a lot of me trying to figure out ways to make the fan base like, or help the fan base understand the decision while also kind of being like, look, like, yeah, it's a decision that is being met with a lot of critique and a lot of criticism, but like this thing could look, this could be a good move down the road. And sure enough, it was. And I think that was like a big thing that I think is going to now change the way that people are drafting moving forward. You look at what the Giants are doing, you look at like potentially what the Steelers could do, heck, even the Saints. And I think that you could see potentially this year, next year, a lot more teams double dipping in both free agency and the draft in terms of the quarterback position. The Falcons just so happened to do it last year. And I think like that was my initial reaction, was like, how do I spin this forward? Because it's going to be met with a lot of disdain. And then in terms of like
the season.
Yeah. And then in terms of my expectations for Michael Penix, it's play clean, but play dynamic football. I think that he has such a good opportunity with the unit as it stands right now, that if he can get the ball in the hands of his playmakers, that's all well and good. And that's like the bare minimum at like, especially I think when you were looking at what Kirk Cousins did in the month of October, it wasn't these like huge dynamic plays. There were some times where he was just getting the ball in the hands of Darnell Mooney, of Drake London, letting those guys go and make plays. And it worked out. The problem with Kirk Cousins in November and December was that he struggled to do that. He struggled to get the ball in their hands. Now, Michael Penix, I think, is a bit more of a dynamic player, obviously, but that no one's debating that. I think what you're going to get with Michael Penix is there's going to be times where I think he is going to play really big and he's going to push the ball down the field. And so it's still being clean while also taking those shots to the best of his ability to connect on those, because those are low percentage shots. So just in the meantime, like take your shots, because you're going to take shots with Michael Penix. But when you're not taking shots, make sure you're connecting on those really easy 10-yard out routes, just to get a first down. So that's my expectation for Michael Penix in his first year, clean and dynamic.
Yeah. And I think that's very fair, Tori, because like you said, at the end of the day, the reaction, I mean, still, if you look in our comments, you can still see it's taking people back to that moment that was a bit triggering, but that ultimately, as we all got to like sleep on it for a couple hours, I can even remember our Thursday show preparing for it, then our reaction show that following Monday, because of course we did our Thursday show before Penix was drafted, but then by that Thursday and that following Monday, we started to kind of say, okay, what could this possibly mean relative to what we've seen under center for the last couple of seasons, having a Kirk Cousins and then a Michael Penix Jr. And then I think everybody started to kind of embrace the idea a bit more because you have more understanding. But for you, Free, when you look back at that day, what was your first reaction when you heard that Michael Penix Jr. was the draft pick? What was your reaction by the end of the season, or thoughts by the end of the season? And what are your expectations coming into this season for him?
Well, my initial reaction was like, oh no, because I did a whole show the day before being like, the Falcons are definitely not going to draft a quarterback. And I was like, oh, throw that podcast out completely out the window. That aged like, milk in Iraq or whatever. And so my initial concern with the pick was the opportunity cost, which was, could you get somebody that's going to help you win football games this year, particularly when it comes to the pass rush? And sort of for me, my negative reaction was the overconfidence I think this coaching staff had in the team that they had already built up to that point, that they didn't need to add more help on the defensive side of the ball in order to win more games. And I think that kind of played out over the course of the season. The other concern I kind of had was the tightrope that the team was sort of putting themselves into, where they had to walk this fine line of, we got to be able to maximize the Kirk Cousins situation over the next 2 years to justify the money that they paid for him. But at the same time, like, you want Kirk Cousins to be good, but not good enough to the point where it's like, it kind of makes the Michael Penix pick a waste of a pick, because you still want to be able to transition. And the Falcons didn't really walk that tightrope with Kirk, but hopefully they're going to be able to walk it with Michael Penix and be able to maximize him moving forward. And that's how it works out for them in the long term. So I think we're on that path. And for me, because I liked Michael Penix, but I didn't see him as a top 10 pick, I was just like, this is like, it feels like a reach at this point. But I thought by the end of the season, all the things that I had concerns with Michael Penix in terms of, how is he going to handle pressure? How is he going to deal with the accuracy issues? Playing in a different style of offense in the NFL. Most of those issues went away to the point where I feel like whatever concerns I had about him as a prospect, I feel like are very manageable moving forward for this football team going into year 2 with him as a starter. And so to me, my big question in my expectations for Michael Penix in year 2 is, like, I expect, some really positive moments, I also expect some up and down play for Michael Penix. And so my big question is not really about Michael Penix. It's going to be about the rest of the team, similar to the conversation we were having with Kirk Cousins a year ago, where it's like when Michael Penix is going through those ups and downs, is the rest of the team able to kind of rally together? Are you going to be able to get the run game? Are you going to be able to generate, an explosive offense with your play action passing game? Are you going to have stability on your offensive line? Is your defense going to stop teams so that we're not sitting here asking Michael Penix to have to score 44
points every week?
Yeah. No, or like you go back to that week 18 game where it's like you scored 38 points and you lost the game. And it's just like are there going to be more games like that this upcoming season where we get into a shootout, in MBS with the Buffalo Bills or the Miami Dolphins or some of these other teams that have these potent offenses that are just going to go up and down the field against a Falcons defense if that defense isn't significantly improved from what they were last year? And that, means that Michael Penix can play great football like we saw in week 18, but it doesn't matter because you lost the game and whatnot. And so those are more of my concerns than necessarily concerns about Michael Penix going into year 2.
Yeah, and that's fair. That's very, very fair. Well, I don't know how I thought we were going to take a walk down memory lane and get past round 1 in one segment. So you guys will have to come back to the next party in order for us to download on the rest of the 2024 draft class. But we're moving forward with the 15th pick in the 2025 NFL draft. The Atlanta Falcons select. We'll discuss it in the look ahead. This episode of our Atlanta Football Party is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all the money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you'll realize just how much you spend on maybe food delivery. You can budget smarter. You can save more. Also, instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever because you can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without all the stress. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Check it out at monarchmoney.com. So, guys, the Falcons are on the clock in less than 3 weeks. So let's predict the pick, but let's do it from a couple different angles with the assumption that the Falcons will pick at 15. And we'll talk a little bit about what else that could look like or what the other options are. But for the point of this conversation, Tori, let's start with the assumption that the Falcons will stay at 15. Give me your number 1A ideal choice of player, 1B, and your 1C.
So I think 1A is probably going to be Mike Green. I think that he is somebody who is going to be there. Like if I'm my 1A is like somebody who I think will be there and is potentially the best person that you can get at number 15. I really like his play style. I think that he has a high ceiling, and I think that he has kind of the true production, even though it's coming from a place where the competition level is a bit different. I don't think that is. I just think that he can come in and be a playmaker for this team, and his kind of like floor isn't super low, and I think I need to feel confident that the Falcons are going to find someone who can come in and be a playmaker immediately. And at number 15, I think I could say, some different guys like Jalen Walker or Michael Williams or, Shemar Stewart. But I think that for some of those guys, I don't think they're going to be there at number 15. So I think Mike Green is the one that I feel the most confident being there at number 15 and being kind of the best guy on the board at the edge rusher position come night of.
Yeah. I like that. And what about you, Free? Who would be your 1A for your ideal player that the Falcons will take at 15?
Well, I would love to come on here and say someone different than what Tori said, but I'm not. I'm going to say Mike Green out of Marshall. I feel like for me, there's kind of a couple of guys that I'm kind of circling as guys that I think have the right balance of floor and ceiling. And I feel like Green of that group probably is the best of in terms of balancing those two things, where you have a reasonably high floor coming into the league and you also have a particularly high ceiling where you could be looking at a player that could be that double digit sack guy in a couple of years. You're not going to get that guy right away in all likelihood, but like in terms of finding that potential Batman type of pass rusher where we talk about that alpha, whatever words you want to use, that guy that teams have to game plan for. I feel like Mike Green at this point probably has the best combination and potential traits to be that guy for the Falcons.
Jarvis, are you making it a 3 for 3?
Absolutely, on 1000%. I want to go back to 2014 when I was but this was kind of like when I first got into broadcasting, right? And I was just like, oh my gosh, Khalil Mack is absolutely amazing. And I think that a lot of people were like, oh, he went to a small school competition. No, did you see when he played against Ohio State, right? And I think that, and I point to the matchup against Ohio State with Mike Green as well. The man, he still had the same explosiveness. He still had the same ability to get off the ball. He still had the same ability to get to the quarterback. So for me, I look at it from the standpoint of those traits being able to transfer, right? Like how explosive is the guy? You talk about the 3-cone drill and how he had an elite time, right? When you talk about that's being able to move around in space, getting from point to point, just like that. And those are the things that you need to look at when you start talking about, okay, I get that, you played at Marshall, right? Not the Randy Moss Marshalls of the world when you had Chan Pittington and NFL players kind of coming out of that space. But you look at it from a standpoint of, okay, what did he look like when he went up against this particular guy at this particular school when they did play against those big schools? And I feel like he passed the test for me. So, yeah, I'm making it a trifecta. Yeah, I would go with Mike Green as well because of, like Tori mentioned, he'll probably be there, sitting there at 15 spot. And more than likely, this is the guy that I'm not saying he's 100% safe pick like a Khalil Mack, but he's a chip on the shoulder type guy. Feel like he has something to prove, and he has the ability to go out there and do it.
Yeah. And Jarvis, what about your 1B? If the Falcons decide not to go with a Mike Green, who would you want to see them pick at 15?
Now, this particular guy is a guy that I actually got a chance to talk to down in Mobile, Alabama, Donovan Ezeiruaku. The reason why I like him is because I feel like they can potentially trade back and get him a few spots because he's starting to heat up a little bit. Teams are starting to come around on him. And I think that the one thing that I liked about him in our conversation is that the fact that he has that self-awareness, right? Because he's not the biggest guy. But the dude got long behind arms. He got like 34-inch arms. The man can get his hands on you before you get into his body. So, and that's the biggest thing when you talk about defensive linemen, like having those long arms. I can long arm bull you, and you can be nowhere near me, and I can do what I need to do with dip and rip or spin back inside. All those things kind of come into play when you're able to get your hands on the offensive lineman before he's able to get his hands on you. So I feel like Donovan Ezeiruaku is a guy that I would go the edge guy out of Boston College. I think that he's a guy that understands what he needs to work on, what teams are saying that he can't do well, and that's playing against the run. And I saw what I needed to see from him down in Mobile when he was being able to execute and get his hands on offensive lineman and get off and make a play. So yeah, that's my 1B.
What about you, Free? Your 1B?
Yeah, I mean, for me, he's a player that's a little polarizing, but I go with Shemar Stewart out of Texas A&M. I know there's been lots of speculation that he'll be long gone when the Falcons pick. A lot of recent mock drafts have seen him kind of falling in these mock drafts. Obviously, they're mock drafts, so we'll see how NFL teams feel about it. But I look at Shemar Stewart as a guy that has, despite the lack of production, I think he's a guy that his skill set we know kind of translates to the next level with his size, strength, and power. We saw this with Jared Verse last year, where he was just basically able to come into the league and just basically say, I got one thing that I know I can bully guys with, and that's my power. And Jared Verse did that to a, really high level. Now, I'm not saying Shemar Stewart is Jared Verse, but I know Shemar Stewart can bully guys. He came to the Senior Bowl day one. He was trying to do different things. And then day two, he's, you know what? I'm going to go to my try and true. I got one great pitch, call it a fastball, call it a curveball or whatever. And I'm going to throw it at everybody. And he just went around and just bullying everybody all day long to the point that he was just like, peace out, everybody. I did all that I needed to do at the Senior Bowl. I'm out of here. And so I feel like it's a similar conversation going into the league where you as a coaching staff with your Nate Ollie and Jeff Ulbrich and all these guys, you get Shemar Stewart in the building, you have a floor in terms of, hey, starting out in the league, just go out there and use your length, use your power to bully offensive linemen. That's the thing that offensive linemen worry the most about when it comes to just going through your chest, and then we can build from there. And so that's where I think the potential of Shemar Stewart could potentially shine. But I think coming into the league, he has an effective pitch, and I think that makes him a little bit more worthwhile than some of the other options.
And Tori, wrap us up. Your B, 1B, and your 1C.
So 1B, I think, is Michael Williams. I do think that what he was his last year at the University of Georgia is not who he's going to be moving forward. I think that especially what he was as a run defender, I think that there's a lot more there for him. And I think that injury over the last year played a big role in his, at times, inability to trust it. And I think that is going to be different as he's now a year removed from the injury. And I don't know, I just feel like he's one of the most consistent ready-made guys. Again, I'm going back to kind of the argument that I think both Free and I were talking about with Mike Green. It's like, where does the floor and ceiling match up? And kind of when you know what you're getting from a player, I think I feel really confident in who Michael Williams is. And as for my 1C, I actually think it's going to be interesting. Jihad Campbell. I know that not a lot of people are like, ooh, draft an inside linebacker. But I do think he is one of the most talented defenders in the first round of this draft, regardless of position. And I think that you're not necessarily going to – it's one of those things, because if you're at 15 and there's a run on edge rushers and you kind of have to start looking at cornerbacks, you have to start looking at someone like Campbell. I don't hate the idea of taking one of the most well-rounded athlete in the class at that pick if you're sticking at number 15. So even though there's not a true need for someone like Campbell, I think that you can actually make that work, especially if you are smart and strategic with what you do in the second and the third rounds. So that may be a hot take and people may hate that, but that's my 1C.
All right, Free. Jarvis, give me your 1C just in the name, just in case they're hot takes too, or alleged hot takes.
No, I'm not going to go with the hot take. I feel, Michael Williams has a lot of potential, and this may be my bias because I've always covering the Georgia Bulldogs and going through that whole postcast situation and being after every game talking about, wanting to see it. I feel like, he could potentially have a Trayvon Walker type trajectory, even though I like to stay away from those type guys. But I feel like it's the size, the length, and just the potential is there. So that will be, that's why it's my 1C, right? Because I feel like Michael Williams could be that guy to do better in the league than he did in college from a numbers perspective.
Free, your 1C?
Yeah, it's Michael Williams. Basically, all the same things I said about Shemar Stewart, I feel similar to Michael Williams. I just personally put Shemar Stewart a little bit higher just because I feel like the athleticism and the power pops off the film. Part of that is, as what Tori mentioned, sort of the injury that sort of held back Michael Williams this past year. So I do think there is more upside to him, but it's a lot of the same reasons.
Yeah. Well, a guy who was maybe as good, if not better, in college and then in the pros has hung up his cleats. Is Canton his next stop? We'll discuss. So, Aaron, we finally got the official from Julio Jones himself that he is retiring after 13 seasons in the NFL, 7 Pro Bowls, 2-time first-team All-Pro, led the NFL twice in receiving yards, all-time leader in receptions and receiving yards for the Falcons. You could give Julio Jones a gazillion accolades, and it probably still won't really, really encapsulate how good of a player Julio Jones really was. What is your favorite memory of him as a Falcon?
Well, I got to take it back to like 2014. I remember the Falcons were playing the Packers on a Monday night game, and they were getting blown out in the first half. I think they were down like 31-7 or something like that at halftime. And I remember buying some alcohol that night to enjoy the Monday night festivities. And because of how
Or cope with them.
yes. And so how bad it was, I was like, well, might as well break into this whole 6-pack and get this thing done at halftime. So for that second half of that game, I was very inebriated, and watching Julio just kind of put the team on his back. And just like, I think, I forget what, trying to look up how many yards he went for 259 that night, and just basically just single-handedly carry the Falcons back to make it a game and give you a chance. They ultimately lost that game by one score, 43-37. And just watching Julio just kind of take over a game, you know, as he did so many times throughout his NFL career. But like that night in particular, because I was very drunk, and because it was just such a foregone conclusion at the Falcons. Oh, here we go. The Falcons blowing it on a primetime game. And then Julio just like, you know what? I'm just going to basically just single-handedly wreck this game for the Green Bay Packers. And watching that, to me, was a beautiful thing.
I feel like a lit free is just something that we all need to see one of these good days. All right, Tori, what is your favorite memory of Julio as a Falcon?
Oh, man. So this is actually like... I could pick an on-field moment. I absolutely could. But for me personally, it's the fact that this man, and I have beef, it's the fact that this man only makes news when I am on vacation. And I don't know how he does it. It's like almost like uncanny at this point. Like so when he signed his extension back in like 2019, I wasn't like covering the team at the time, but I was kind of like helping out with some stuff. So like, but I was on vacation then. When he was traded to the Tennessee Titans, I had been working for 32 days straight and was about to go on vacation. I literally walked onto the airplane. I literally tweeted out, hopefully Julio doesn't do anything because I'm going on vacation. So like no one need me. From the time I tweeted that to the time I walked on the airplane and got to my seat, he had been traded. And he signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was on vacation. When he announced his retirement on Friday, I was on my sister's bachelorette trip. So for me, it's like I could pick 1,000 moments of watching Julio Jones and being like, what is this monster of a human being who's just like absolutely manhandling guys, like the Luke Kuechly catch where he mosses him like that. That will be ingrained in my head forever. But it's more along the lines of the emotional distress he has personally caused me that I'm like, you know what? Only Julio Jones would pull me out of vacation as much as he has, and I would be okay with it because it's Julio Jones. So that's my, they're not my fondest memories because I definitely cried on the plane because I was so upset. But they are memories nonetheless.
Nonetheless, right?
Yep.
Oh my
Jarvis,
God.
what about you? Memories of Julio.
I like pain. So here we go. I'm going to the 28-3. I'm going to the Super Bowl. When that man made that catch on that sideline with the twinkle toes, the acrobatic, the athleticism, and no one thought he really caught it. And I can't remember the DB's name that was covering him. He was like, "Oh no." And then they showed that slow replay. I was like, "Oh my gosh, this man actually got both feet down." And according to one of my sources closest to the situation, I got so excited because as soon as I looked down at my phone, you know, there was a person that texted me saying, "Hey, it's going to be open tonight." And I'm talking about a place that is very famous on Mondays. It's not normally open on Sunday.
It's church, yeah.
Yes.
The other
Yes,
church,
it was a church. Yes.
Certain kind of
Mhm. Yeah, where they model shoes. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't gonna be that church that night, you know. And I got excited about myself, and my wife was like, "Oh my God, that'd be great! You guys go hang with each other, and have a good time, and celebrate." So you know, I'm all getting excited and everything. And then, of course, you know what eventually happened, but you know, just to see him in that moment, and for me to get that text right behind it. So I'm gonna add a little personal in there too, Tori. It would just. It would have been a beautiful thing if that were to have gone down. But unfortunately, you know, hey, I'm an Atlanta sports fan. That's how it kind of rolls. You know?
Right. There's always that tear of joy and tear of pain all mixed in at the same time for the Atlanta sports faithful. Yeah, no. And for me, it's much the same. I could probably call out a million things I saw on the field, but it was this one moment where we're covering where it was after practice and Julio hits the podium. And, you know, Julio was one of those who he really didn't want to talk to us, if we're being honest, but he was always very good about still talking to us. And that particular day, I was actually asking him about another one of the receivers in the core, kind of like him as the elder statesman. And all he heard was me ask that, I forget which receiver's name it was, but all he heard was that receiver. And he was like, "You mean so-and-so?" As if to say, "Girl, you don't know I'm Julio?" And so I kind of came back with "Boy, I know you, Julio." And he kind of chuckled about it. Like the funniest little moment at, you know, the podium with him. And so that will kind of always be etched in my mind. Grady Jerry did that to me, by the way, as well. But yeah, I just thought that was funny because at first he was kind of offended. But then when I kind of popped back with that same energy, he was kind of like, "Oh, okay, well, that's where we're going." So that kind of always makes me chuckle when I think about Julio. But one more thing before I let you guys go. First ballot Hall of Famer, yay or nay?
Should be.
Yeah, I think
yes,
absolutely.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I would say the same. I
know a lot of people are gonna look at the touchdowns, 66 touchdowns. Oh, that's a little low. But man, when you talk about the effect and the way he changed games, and you talking about who was the best wide receiver in his time, he was always in the conversation. And I'm talking about top two.
Yep.
You know?
And he wasn't too.
And he wasn't too.
Exactly. No, at all. And that's really what you have to think about. And I always say, once you get into a place, well, not I say, I was told this by some of the executives at the Hall of Fame, that one of the things that always bodes well is if you have a team member or two or three, especially if you're like the Falcons. And again, this is no shade, but with the Steelers, it's easier because you have so many Steelers who are in the Hall. So it's easy for them to advocate. But once you get one or two Falcons in there, or players who have played with the Falcons, like a Devin Hester or a Deion Sanders, or even a Claude Humphrey, it makes the conversation that much easier to get a guy like Julio Jones in on the first ballot, which he is so deserving of. Thanks to our everydayers for making the Atlanta Football Party your first listen of the day. Be sure to stop by Locked On Falcons with Aaron and his frequent guest analyst Jarvis as your second listen, and check out some of Tori's great work at atlantafalcons.com. We will see you next time.